The courtroom was silent except for the sound of paper trembling in the judge's hands. My husband sat across the aisle, his lawyer whispering something urgent in his ear, but I couldn't look away from Judge Morrison's face. Her expression had shifted from professional detachment to something I couldn't name, shock, perhaps, or disbelief. She cleared her throat once, twice, then a third time before speaking. "I need everyone to remain seated," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavy. "I've just read something that changes the nature of these proceedings entirely." David's hand was on the table between us, his wedding ring, the one I'd chosen 7 years ago, catching the fluorescent light. He wasn't wearing it anymore. I noticed that for the first time in that moment, even though he'd moved out 3 months prior. The judge looked directly at me, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. "Pity." "Mrs. Chen," she said, "I think you need to hear this. 6 months earlier, I didn't know my marriage was ending." That's the strange thing about betrayal. It happens in the background of ordinary moments, growing like mold behind the walls of a house you think is solid. You're making coffee, folding laundry, laughing at a joke, and somewhere in the foundation, everything is already rotting. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was 34 years old when my life split into before and after. The before part looked picture-perfect from the outside. A colonial house in a neighborhood where people actually waved at each other, a husband who was a successful architect, a daughter who just turned 6 and still believed in magic. I worked as a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, the kind of job that exhausted me but also filled me with purpose. David and I had met in college, one of those rom-com beginnings where I literally ran into him coming out of the library, scattering my anatomy textbooks across the quad. He'd helped me pick them up, made a terrible joke about having no stomach for medical terms, and asked me to coffee. 3 years later, we were married. 4 years after that, Emma was born, arriving 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm that knocked out power to half the city. I still remember how David held her for the first time, this tiny creature wrapped in a hospital blanket, and cried. Not just teared up, actually cried, his shoulders shaking with the weight of instant, overwhelming love. How does a man who cries holding his daughter become someone who files for divorce without warning? That's the question that haunted me during those long nights after he left, when I'd lie in our bed, just my bed now, and try to reverse engineer the collapse of my marriage. I'd replay conversations, looking for clues. I'd examine memories like crime scene evidence, searching for the moment when David stopped being my person. The thing is, I found dozens of moments, hundreds maybe. The way he'd stopped touching me when he walked past, how his hand no longer found the small of my back in crowds. The way "I love you" had become a reflex, words said out of habit rather than feeling, like saying "bless you" after a sneeze. The increasing frequency of late nights at the office, weekends spent on his laptop, phone calls taken in the garage or the backyard, his voice dropping to a murmur I wasn't meant to hear. But I'd rationalized everything. We were busy. We were tired. We were parents juggling careers and a young child and a mortgage and all the administrative chaos of adult life. This was normal. This was what happened when passion matured into partnership. Except it wasn't maturing. It was dying, and I'd been so busy convincing myself everything was fine that I didn't notice I was planning a funeral. The night David told me he wanted a divorce, it was raining. Not the dramatic thunderstorm kind of rain you see in movies, but the persistent, dreary November drizzle that makes everything look gray and sad. Emma was at my mother's house for the weekend, a rare occurrence we'd planned weeks in advance so David and I could have couple time. We'd talked about going to that new Italian restaurant downtown, maybe seeing a movie afterward. Instead, I was standing in our kitchen, still in my scrubs from the hospital, when David came home carrying a folder. Not a briefcase, not his usual messenger bag, just a manila folder, the kind you'd buy at Office Depot for 99 cents. "We need to talk," he said. 4 words, 4 devastatingly ordinary words that people say dozens of times a day, usually about nothing important. "Did you pay the electric bill? What should we have for dinner? Do you think Emma needs a tutor for math?" But I knew. In that instant, with my husband standing in the doorway of our kitchen holding that cheap folder, I knew my life was about to detonate. "Okay," I said, and my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. He didn't sit down. That should have been my second clue. David always sat down for serious conversations. It was one of his things, a habit from his architect training. Face the person, ground yourself, be present. He'd told me that once, early in our marriage, when we'd had our first real fight about something I can't even remember now. But he stood there, still holding the folder, and said, "I've filed for divorce. These are your copies of the paperwork." No preamble. No, I'm unhappy, or we need to try counseling, or I've been thinking about this for a while. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the emotional inflection of someone reading a shipping label. I don't remember what I said next. The memory has gaps, like footage from a damaged camera. I remember gripping the counter. I remember the sound of rain on the windows. I remember David's mouth moving, forming words about growing apart and wanting different things, and it's not working anymore. But they didn't connect to meaning in my brain. "Is there someone else?" I asked at some point. "No," he said too quickly. "This isn't about another person. This is about us, about how we're not us anymore." "We can fix it," I said, and I hated how desperate I sounded, how small. "David, we can go to counseling. We can." "I don't want to fix it," he said, and the flatness in his voice was worse than anger would have been. "I'm done, Sarah. I'm sorry, but I'm done." He left the folder on the counter and walked out. I heard him climbing the stairs, heard drawers opening and closing in our bedroom, heard the zip of a suitcase. 20 minutes later, he came back down with 2 bags and his laptop case. "I'll arrange to get the rest of my things later," he said. "My lawyer will be in touch." Then he was gone. I stood in that kitchen for an hour afterward, staring at the folder like it might spontaneously combust. When I finally opened it, the legal language swam before my eyes. Petitioner, respondent, irreconcilable differences, proposed custody arrangement, division of assets. Our marriage, reduced to terms and conditions. The next morning, I told Emma that Daddy was going to be living somewhere else for a while. She was sitting at the breakfast table, drawing a picture of a purple unicorn with crayon, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, a habit she'd inherited from David. The morning light through the window made her hair look almost golden, and I thought about how much I wanted to preserve this moment, this last instant before I broke her heart. "Why?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Because sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out," I said, using the same calm, reassuring voice I used at the hospital when I had to explain shots to scared children. "Is Daddy mad at us?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "No, baby, no, Daddy's not mad at anyone. He needs some time." "Will he come back?" I didn't know how to answer that. How do you explain divorce to a 6-year-old when you don't understand it yourself? "Daddy will always be your daddy," I said instead. "He'll still see you all the time. That won't change." Emma finally looked up at me, her brown eyes, David's eyes, searching my face for the truth I was trying to hide. Kids are like that. They can sense the shape of lies even when they can't name them. "You look sad, Mommy," she said. "I am a little sad," I admitted, "but I'll be okay. We'll both be okay." It was the first of many lies I'd tell in the coming months. Necessary lies, protective lies, lies that felt like love. The first month after David left was a blur of lawyer consultations, paperwork, and the strange administrative horror of dismantling a life. Our lawyer, mine now, not ours, was a woman named Patricia Hendricks, 50-something with steel-gray hair and the brisk efficiency of someone who'd seen 1,000 marriages die and no longer had patience for emotional breakdowns. "You're entitled to spousal support," she told me during our second meeting, sliding a yellow legal pad across her desk. "Given the length of the marriage and the income disparity, we're looking at likely 3 to 5 years of payments. We'll also pursue a 50-50 split of assets, which includes the house equity, retirement accounts, and savings." I stared at the numbers she'd written down. They looked both huge and meaningless, like figures from a fantasy novel. "What about Emma?" I asked. "Custody will be trickier. He's asking for 50-50, alternating weeks. Is there any reason we should oppose that?" "He's her father," I said. "He's a good father." Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand that good father and what's best for your case aren't always the same thing, if you want primary custody." "I don't want to weaponize my daughter," I said, more sharply than I'd intended. "David can be a terrible husband and still be a good dad. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." She sighed, the sound of a professional who'd heard this before and knew how it would end. "All right, we'll start with a joint custody proposal and see how they respond. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. Divorce brings out the worst in people, even the good ones." She was right, though not in the way I expected. David's behavior over the next few months was strange. Not hostile, that would have been easier to understand. Instead, he was meticulously fair, almost aggressively reasonable. He paid for Emma's school expenses without being asked. He showed up exactly on time for custody exchanges. He was polite in emails, professional in phone calls, and avoided me entirely during in-person interactions, speaking directly to Emma as if I were a piece of furniture. It was the avoidance that hurt most. We'd been together for over a decade, and now I was someone he couldn't bear to look at. I started watching him during those custody handoffs, studying him the way you'd study a stranger. He'd lost weight, not much, but enough that his face looked sharper, older. He wasn't sleeping well. I could see it in the shadows under his eyes. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite name. A nervousness, maybe, or guilt. "Is there someone else?" I'd asked my friend Rachel one night over wine. She was a teacher at Emma's school, divorced herself, and had become my unofficial guide through this nightmare. "Does it matter?" she'd replied. "Of course it matters," I'd said. "If he left me for another woman." "Then what? It changes the emotional narrative, but legally, it doesn't mean much unless you're in an at-fault state, which we're not. And emotionally, Sarah, is it worse to be left for someone else or to be left for nothing, for just lack of feeling?" I'd thought about that a lot since. I still didn't have an answer. The first hint that something was deeply wrong came in month 3, during a routine custody exchange. David pulled up in front of the house, our house, though the divorce meant I'd likely have to sell it and split the equity, and Emma ran out to meet him. I watched from the doorway as he hugged her, lifting her up and spinning her around, and for just a moment he looked happy. Genuinely happy, the way he used to look. Then he caught me watching, and his face closed like a door slamming shut. But Emma was pulling him toward the house, chattering about a science project she needed help with, and he had no choice but to follow. I stepped back to let them in, and that's when I saw it. A prescription pill bottle, half visible in the cup holder of his car. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. People take medication, it's normal, except I recognized the bottle. Orange, plastic, distinctive label. It was from St. Mary's Hospital Pharmacy, where I worked. Where David had never been a patient. The second hint came a week later, when Emma said something that made my blood freeze. We were making dinner together, her little hands helping me tear lettuce for a salad, when she said, "Daddy's friend is nice." "What friend, baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "The lady who was at his apartment. She brought cookies." There it was, the confirmation I'd been both dreading and expecting. David had lied. There was someone else. "What was her name?" I asked, still tearing lettuce, still pretending this was a normal conversation. "I don't remember. Something with an M. She had red hair." Red hair. I mentally flipped through everyone we knew, everyone David worked with. I came up empty. "Did Daddy say who she was?" Emma shrugged. "Just a friend. She seemed sad, though." "Sad?" "Yeah, she kept looking at me weird, like..." Emma paused, searching for words. "Like when you look at me when you think I'm sleeping, kind of sad and happy at the same time." The lettuce in my hands turned to pulp as I clenched my fists. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped. I'd never gone through David's phone or email, never checked his pockets or questioned his schedule. I'd trusted him, completely and naively. But trust, once broken, doesn't just disappear. It inverts, becomes suspicion, and suspicion is a cancer that grows until it consumes everything. So I started digging. First, I called Bethany, David's administrative assistant. We'd always gotten along well. She'd organized Emma's birthday parties, sent flowers when my father died. If anyone knew about David's personal life, it would be her. "Sarah," she said when she answered, and I could hear the awkwardness in her voice. "How are you?" "I've been better," I said. "Bate, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Silence on the other end. "Is David seeing someone?" I asked. More silence, longer this time. Then, "I don't know. Honestly, Sarah, I don't, but..." "But what?" "He's been different, distracted. He takes a lot of calls outside the office, and he's been leaving. Early at least twice a week for the past 4 months. He said it was personal appointments, but he never said what kind." 4 months. He'd been planning this divorce for 4 months before telling me. "Has a woman called for him? Red hair, name starting with M." "Not that I know of, but Sarah, if he is seeing someone, I don't think it's what you think. He's been..." She paused, choosing words carefully. "He's been sad, really sad. That's not what someone having an affair looks like." After I hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried. Not gentle tears, but ugly, angry sobs that shook my whole body. A colleague walking by knocked on my window, concerned, and I had to wave her away, pretending I'd just received bad news. I had received bad news. I was living in bad news. The prescription bottle nagged at me. 2 days later, during my shift at St. Mary's, I did something I'd never done before. I accessed pharmacy records I had no business looking at. It took me 15 minutes to find it, and when I did, I understood nothing. The prescription was for lorazepam, an anti-anxiety medication. It had been filled 6 weeks ago. The patient name wasn't David's. It was Emma's. Except Emma didn't have a prescription. I was her mother. I would know. She was 6 years old and healthy, no medical issues beyond the occasional cold. I checked the prescribing physician, Dr. Margaret Okonkwo, pediatric oncology. Oncology. Cancer. The room tilted. I gripped the desk to steady myself, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. This had to be a mistake, some kind of administrative error. Emma was fine. She was perfect and healthy and fine. I called Dr. Okonkwo's office directly. "This is Sarah Chen," I said when the receptionist answered. "I'm a nurse at St. Mary's, and I need to speak with Dr. Okonkwo about my daughter, Emma Chen. I see there's a prescription in the system, and I need to understand." "Ma'am," the receptionist interrupted, "I'll need to transfer you to the doctor, but she's with a patient right now. Can I take your number and have her call you back?" "This is urgent," I said, and I could hear the edge of panic in my voice. "My daughter has a prescription from your department, and I don't know why. I need to know why." "Please hold." Elevator music, the sound of my own breathing, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "Then, Mrs. Chen," a woman's voice, calm and professional. "This is Dr. Okonkwo. I believe there might be some confusion. I don't have an Emma Chen in my patient files." "But the prescription." "Can you give me the patient ID number?" I read it off, heard typing. "Ah," she said, and something in that syllable made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Chen, that prescription isn't for your daughter. It was prescribed to Emma Chen, but a different Emma Chen. She's 28 years old. The prescription was filled by her fiancé, David Chen." The world stopped. "What?" I whispered. "I shouldn't be telling you this," Dr. Okonkwo said, "but if there's been confusion about a minor with the same name, I need to clarify. The patient I'm treating is an adult with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She's been in treatment for 7 months. Her fiancé has been very involved in her care." Fiancé. David had a fiancé. David had a fiancé with cancer. David had a fiancé with cancer who had the same name as our daughter. I drove home on autopilot, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. None of it made sense. David couldn't be engaged. We were still married. Unless he'd been lying about the timeline. Unless this had been going on longer than I thought. But 7 months of cancer treatment? That meant he'd met her, Emma, the other Emma, at least 7 months ago. Probably longer if they were engaged. I'd suspected an affair. I'd been hurt by the idea of being replaced. But this was something else entirely. This was a double life, a parallel universe where David had a whole other existence I knew nothing about. When I got home, I went straight to his study, the one room in the house I'd avoided since he'd left, because it still smelled like him and that hurt too much. I started searching. I found the letters in a shoebox at the back of his closet, hidden under old tax returns. They were handwritten, dated, dozens of them. I recognized the handwriting, David's distinctive architect's scrawl. I pulled out the most recent one and read. My Emma, I know you told me not to write anymore, that it's too painful to keep visiting the past, but I can't stop. Writing to you is the only thing that feels real anymore. Today marks 6 months since diagnosis, 6 months since our world imploded. I keep thinking about the day we met, how you laughed when I spilled coffee on your thesis notes. You said it was fate. Maybe it was. Maybe all of this is fate, some cosmic joke where we finally find each other only to have it stolen away. The doctors say the treatment is working, but I see the truth in your eyes. You're tired, love, so tired. And I can't fix it. I can't architect a solution to leukemia. I can't draft a blueprint for survival. Sarah still doesn't know about you. She doesn't know about us. I know I need to tell her, but how? How do I explain that I met you 5 years ago and have been in love with you ever since? How do I explain that I stayed in a marriage that was already dead because I was a coward? How do I explain that I finally left not because I stopped loving her, but because I started dying watching you die? The lawyer says the divorce should be final in 6 months. By then, maybe we'll have our miracle. Maybe you'll be in remission and we can finally start the life we've talked about. The little house by the coast, morning coffee on the porch, a life without secrets. I love you. I've loved you since the moment you laughed at my clumsiness, and I will love you until my last breath. Forever yours, David. I read it 3 times, each time understanding less. 5 years. David had been having an affair for 5 years. Our entire marriage, everything I'd believed about us, had been a performance. While I was loving him, trusting him, building a life with him, he'd been building another life elsewhere. But the tone of the letter wasn't what I'd expected. There was no cruelty in it, no callousness, just profound sadness and guilt. David wasn't leaving me for a younger, more exciting woman. He was leaving me for someone who was dying. And somehow, that was worse. I spent the next 2 weeks in a fog, going through the motions of life while my mind churned. I couldn't confront David directly. What would I say? I found your love letters to your dying mistress. It sounded absurd even in my head, and part of me didn't want to know more. Part of me wanted to stay in the shallow end of betrayal, where I could be angry without being devastated. But the mystery consumed me. I found myself searching for Emma Chens in the area, scrolling through social media profiles at 2 a.m., looking for red-haired women who might be dying of cancer. It was invasive and wrong, and I couldn't stop. Then Emma, my Emma, said something that changed everything. We were having breakfast on a Saturday morning when she asked, "Mommy, what's leukemia?" I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Where did you hear that word? Daddy was on the phone with someone and he said it. He looked really sad. When was this? Yesterday, when he picked me up from school. He didn't know I heard. My daughter, my observant, sensitive daughter, was picking up pieces of her father's secret. I had to protect her from this. But I also had to know. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, David's mother. Carol had always liked me. She'd been supportive after David left in her quiet, reserved way, though she'd refused to discuss David's reasons. "It's between you two," she'd said. "I won't take sides." But when I called her 3 weeks before the court date and said, "Carol, I need to know the truth about David," something in my voice must have broken through her neutrality. "Come over," she said. "We need to talk." Her house smelled like lavender and old books, the same as it had for the 20 years I'd known her. She made tea, a ritual she performed when conversations were going to be difficult. "How much do you know?" she asked, sitting across from me in her living room. "I know about the other Emma," I said. "I know she has cancer. I know David's been seeing her for 5 years. Carol's face crumpled. "Oh, Sarah, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She took a long breath. "Emma isn't David's mistress, she's his sister." The teacup in my hands could have shattered from how hard I gripped it. "What?" "His half-sister, from John's affair before we got married. I didn't know about her until 5 years ago. None of us did. Her mother, John's. The other woman, she reached out when Emma got sick. She was looking for biological family, for medical history, for, I don't know, closure, maybe." The room was spinning. "David has a sister." "Had," Carol corrected quietly. "Emma died 3 weeks ago." The story came out in pieces, each one reshaping everything I thought I knew. David's father, John, had died when David was 19, a heart attack, sudden and devastating. What David hadn't known, what none of them had known, was that John had a brief affair 30 years ago before marrying Carol. The woman, Margaret, had gotten pregnant. She'd never told John, never asked for anything, had raised her daughter alone. Emma, that Emma, had grown up in a different city, living a completely separate life. She'd been happy, according to Carol. Married young, divorced young, became a librarian, lived quietly. Then, at 28, she got sick. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive and terrifying. She needed bone marrow, and no one in her family was a match. The doctors suggested reaching out to her biological father's family. That's when Margaret finally told her the truth about John Chen. Emma found David through social media. Sent him a message. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think we might be related." DNA tests confirmed it. David had a half-sister he'd never known existed, and she was dying. He was devastated, Carol told me, tears streaming down her face. Devastated and guilty and overwhelmed. He got tested immediately to see if he was a bone marrow match, but he wasn't. Neither was I. We both felt so helpless. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "He wanted to. God, Sarah, he wanted to so badly. But Emma asked him not to. She was ashamed, I think. Ashamed of being the product of an affair, ashamed of disrupting our lives. She only wanted medical information, maybe a relationship with David if he was willing. She didn't want to be a scandal." "But the letters," I said, "the way he wrote about her." "He wrote her letters to help her through treatment," Carol said. "Something to read when she was scared, something to hold on to. David's always been like that. He processes emotion through writing. You know that." I did know that. When Emma, our Emma, was born, David had written her a letter welcoming her to the world. He'd cried while reading it at her christening. "Why the divorce?" I asked. "If this was about his sister, why end our marriage?" Carol looked down at her tea. "Because watching Emma die broke something in David. He spent 2 years trying to save her, driving to her appointments, sitting through chemo, advocating with doctors. He put his entire life on hold. And somewhere in that process, he realized he'd been living on autopilot for years. The marriage, the career, all of it. He told me he loved you, Sarah, but he wasn't in love anymore. Hadn't been for a long time. He said it wasn't fair to either of you to keep pretending. So he just left. He thought it was the merciful thing to do. Make a clean break instead of dragging you through a slow decline. He didn't want you to stay out of pity or obligation." Carol reached across and took my hand. "He was wrong. I told him he was wrong, but he wouldn't listen. He said he'd already destroyed one relationship through his own cowardice, staying married when he wasn't happy, and he wasn't going to compound it by making you his nurse through a midlife crisis." "I would have understood," I whispered. "If he'd just told me about Emma, his sister, I would have been there for him, for both of them." "I know," Carol said, "but David doesn't know how to ask for help. He never has." The puzzle pieces were rearranging themselves, forming a picture I didn't recognize. David hadn't betrayed me with another woman. He'd been grieving a sister he'd barely had time to know. He'd been dealing with death and regret, and the implosion of his understanding of his own family history. And he'd done it alone, in secret, because his sister had asked him to. But that didn't excuse the divorce. That didn't excuse the way he'd left, cold and abrupt, without explanation. Unless... "Carol," I said slowly, "why are you telling me this now? Why not 3 months ago?" She looked at me, fresh tears welling. "Because Emma left something for you, a letter. She made David promise to make sure you got it, but only after she was gone. He's been carrying it around, trying to figure out when to give it to you. The court date seemed like the right time, or the wrong time, I don't know anymore. A letter for me, from David's sister. She wanted you to understand. She felt guilty, Sarah. Guilty about the divorce, about the secrets, about the pain David's choices caused you. She asked me to tell you that none of this was your fault, that you were always enough." The words hit me like a physical force. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed to hear them until they were spoken aloud. I'd spent months convinced I'd failed, that I'd been insufficient somehow. That if I'd been a better wife, more attentive, more exciting, more something, David wouldn't have left. But this wasn't about me at all. The day of the final hearing arrived with the kind of brutal, bright sunshine that felt like mockery. I dressed carefully, not to impress David, but to armor myself. Navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I looked like someone competent and in control, even though I felt like I was held together with staples and wishful thinking. Patricia met me outside the courtroom. "You ready?" "No," I said honestly. "Good, the ones who think they're ready usually aren't." She handed me a folder. "Standard hearing. We'll present our case for the custody arrangement and financial settlement. His lawyer will do the same. The judge will make a ruling. It should be straightforward." But nothing about this had been straightforward. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less dramatic. Wood paneling, fluoresque. And lights, uncomfortable benches. David was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Thompson. David looked terrible, weight loss more pronounced than I'd realized, eyes hollow, a grayness to his skin that spoke of months of insufficient sleep. For the first time since he'd left, I felt something other than anger or hurt. I felt worried. Judge Morrison entered, and we rose. She was a black woman in her 50s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd heard every possible excuse and believed none of them. "Please be seated," she said, settling into her chair. "We're here today for the dissolution of marriage between David Chen and Sarah Chen. I've reviewed both filings. Before we proceed, I need to ask, is there any chance of reconciliation?" Patricia started to speak, but David interrupted. "Your Honor, if I may." His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it in days. "There's something I need to submit to the court before we continue. A letter." Judge Morrison frowned. "What kind of letter?" "From a third party. It's relevant to the proceedings." Thompson, David's lawyer, looked as confused as I felt. "Your Honor, I wasn't informed." "I didn't tell him," David said. He was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have done this differently. I should have done everything differently." He approached the bench and handed Judge Morrison an envelope. She opened it, pulled out several pages, and began to read. That's when I saw her expression change. The silence in the courtroom stretched like taffy, thin and tense, and ready to snap. Judge Morrison read the entire letter without speaking. When she finished, she set it down carefully, removed her glasses, and rubbed her eyes. Then she looked at David with an expression I couldn't interpret. "Mr. Chen," she said, "did you write this letter?" "No, Your Honor. It was written by Emma Carson, my half-sister. She passed away 3 weeks ago." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff looked surprised. "Mrs. Chen," Judge Morrison said, turning to me, "I think you need to hear this." "Your Honor," Patricia began, but the judge held up a hand. "This changes the nature of the proceedings. Mrs. Chen has a right to know what's in this letter before we continue." She picked up the pages again. "This is dated 2 months ago. I'll read it aloud." My heart was hammering so hard, I thought everyone in the room could hear it. Judge Morrison cleared her throat and began. To whom it may concern. My name is Emma Carson, and I'm writing this letter because I'm dying, and I need to make sure the truth doesn't die with me. I was David Chen's half-sister. He didn't know I existed until 5 years ago, when I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and needed to find biological family for medical purposes. Discovering David was one of the few good things to come from my diagnosis. He's been my brother, my friend, my advocate, and my lifeline through the worst period of my life. But I'm also the reason his marriage is ending, and I need Sarah Chen to know that's not what I wanted. When David told me he was filing for divorce, I was devastated. I asked him why. He said he'd been unhappy for years, but had convinced himself that staying in an unsatisfying marriage was what responsible adults did. He said that watching me face death had clarified something for him. Life is too short to live it dishonestly. I argued with him. I told him he was making a mistake, that grief was clouding his judgment, that he needed to talk to Sarah before making such a drastic decision. He said he'd tried. He said they'd grown apart so gradually that neither of them had noticed the distance until it was too wide to bridge. He said Sarah deserved someone who loved her completely, not someone who stayed out of guilt and habit. I still think he's wrong. I've watched David care for me these past 2 years, and I've seen the kind of man he is, patient, devoted, capable of profound love. That man didn't stop loving his wife because of some character flaw. He stopped because they both stopped nurturing what they had, and neither of them noticed until it was too late. But here's what I need Sarah to know. David's decision to leave had nothing to do with her being insufficient. She was always enough, more than enough. The problem was that David stopped being present in his own life long before I got sick, and my illness just made that absence visible. I'm writing this letter because I'm about to die, and I don't want to leave this world knowing I contributed to someone else's pain without trying to mitigate it. Sarah, if you're reading this, please know. Your marriage didn't end because you failed. It ended because 2 people drifted apart and neither had the courage to course correct before the current pulled them too far. David isn't leaving you for another woman. He's leaving because he's finally being honest about the fact that he left emotionally years ago and was too much of a coward to admit it. You deserve that honesty. You deserve a partner who chooses you actively, daily, not someone who stays because leaving feels cruel. And David, if you're there too, please listen. You deserve to forgive yourself. You deserve to let go of the guilt about our father's choices, about my illness, about this divorce. You deserve to start living like someone who's allowed to be happy. To the court, I'm asking you to grant this divorce quickly and fairly. Both of these people deserve to move on with their lives. Both of them deserve to find happiness, whether together or apart. But based on everything I've witnessed, I don't think they can find it while tied to a marriage that neither of them is fighting for. Please be kind to them. They're both good people who got lost along the way. With hope and heartbreak, Emma Carson. The silence after Judge Morrison finished reading was absolute. I was crying, ugly, silent tears streaming down my face, my chest heaving with the effort of staying quiet. Across the aisle, David had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. The judge set down the letter and took a long moment before speaking. In 23 years on the bench, she said quietly, I've never read anything quite like that. She looked at both of us. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I'm going to ask you both something, and I want you to think very carefully before answering. After hearing this letter, do either of you want to fight this divorce? I looked at David. He looked at me. And in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time in years, not as my husband, not as the man who'd betrayed me, but as a human being who was broken and grieving and trying his best with insufficient tools. Did I want to fight for this marriage? 3 months ago, the answer would have been yes. I would have fought tooth and nail, convinced that love and determination could fix anything. But Emma, the other Emma, was right. We'd stopped fighting for this marriage years ago. We'd both been coasting, comfortable in our complacency, and it had taken a terminal diagnosis for David to realize we were dead in the water. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to fight it. David exhaled, a sound like relief and sorrow mixed. Neither do I. Judge Morrison nodded. Then let's proceed with fairness and grace, shall we? In memory of someone who clearly understood both. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. The settlement was equitable. David kept his retirement accounts. I got the house, and we split everything else down the middle. Custody of Emma was joint, alternating weeks, with the understanding that we'd both attend her important events regardless of whose week it fell on. It was civilized, painfully, excruciatingly civilized. The day the papers were officially signed, I drove to the cemetery where Emma Carson was buried. I'd asked Carol for the location, and she'd given it without question, understanding something I couldn't articulate. The grave was simple, a flat headstone with her name, dates, and a line from a poem. I was here. I mattered. I loved. I stood there for a long time, staring at the name, thinking about the woman I'd never met who had accidentally saved me from myself. Because that's what the letter had done. It had taken all the blame and inadequacy I'd been carrying and shown me the truth. My marriage hadn't ended because I wasn't enough. It had ended because we'd both stopped trying, and nobody had the courage to admit it. Thank you, I said aloud, feeling foolish but needing to say it anyway. Thank you for being honest when we couldn't be. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of cut grass and distant rain. I'd brought flowers, white roses, because I didn't know what else to bring. I laid them on the grave and turned to leave. That's when I saw David. He was standing about 20 feet away, holding his own flowers, sunflowers, bright and incongruous. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I didn't know you came here. Every Sunday, he said. I promised her I would, until I didn't need to anymore. We stood in awkward silence, two people who'd shared a life and now didn't know how to share space. The letter, I said finally. Did you know what it said? Not really. She wrote it in the hospital 2 days before she died, made me promise not to read it until the court date. He laughed, a hollow sound. Even dying, she was managing people. She was like that. What was she like? I asked, genuinely curious. Really like, I mean, not just as a patient. David's face softened. Funny, really funny in this dry, sarcastic way. She loved terrible puns, worked in a library and was genuinely excited about it. She'd send me recommendations for Emma, books she thought a 6-year-old would love. She was. He trailed off, struggling for words. She was my sister. I didn't know I needed a sister until I had one, and then she was gone. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry I lost you, he said, and the rawness in his voice nearly undid me. Not the marriage. I think Emma's godmother Emma was right about that. But I'm sorry I lost you as a friend, as someone I could talk to. I'm sorry I handled everything so badly. You did handle it badly, I agreed. You should have told me. About your sister, about your feelings, about all of it. We could have figured it out together. I know, but I didn't know how to say I'm not happy without it sounding like you failed. Because you didn't fail, Sarah. You were a good wife. I was just a mediocre husband. We stood there, the truth hanging between us like morning mist. Emma would have liked you, David said eventually. My sister, I mean, she asked about you constantly. What you were like, what made you laugh, whether you'd hate her. She felt guilty about the secrecy. I don't hate her, I said. I'm grateful to her. The letter gave me something I needed. Clarity, I guess, or closure, I don't know. David nodded. Me too. He laid his sunflowers next to my roses, and we both stood there for another moment, paying respects to a woman who'd accidentally taught us both how to let go. I should go, I said. Emma has a soccer game in an hour. I'll be there, David said, if that's okay. Of course, you're her father, you'll always be her father. And you, he paused, what are we now to each other? I thought about that. We weren't husband and wife. We weren't enemies. We weren't strangers, but we weren't friends either, not yet. We're Emma's parents, I said finally. And maybe, eventually, we can be something more, but right now, that's enough. He smiled, small and sad. Yeah, that's enough. Epilogue, 1 year later. Life after divorce was different than I expected. Harder in some ways, single parenting was exhausting, and the house felt too big with just Emma and me rattling around in it, but easier in others. I wasn't tiptoeing around tension anymore, wasn't managing someone else's emotions while ignoring my own. I dated a little, nothing serious, a few dinners with a divorced dad from Emma's school, coffee with a resident at the hospital. None of them sparked anything more than pleasant conversation, and that was okay. I was learning to be alone without being lonely. David and I found our rhythm with co-parenting. We weren't friends exactly, but we were friendly. We texted about Emma's homework, coordinated schedules, showed up to parent-teacher conferences together. Sometimes, during handoffs, we'd chat about nothing important. The weather, a funny thing Emma had said, recommended Netflix shows. Small talk, but genuine. Emma adjusted better than I'd feared. She spent alternate weeks with each of us, and while she sometimes asked when Daddy was coming home, she'd stopped asking if it was her fault. Child therapy helped with that. So did consistency and reassurance, and both of us making sure she knew she was loved. One Saturday, a year and 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I was cleaning out the garage when I found a box I didn't recognize. Inside were more letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my Emma in David's handwriting. I almost put them back without reading, respecting the privacy of his grief. But the last letter was addressed to me. Sarah, if you're reading this, you found my letters to Emma. I should have thrown them away or locked them somewhere more secure, but I couldn't. They're the only tangible proof she existed, that our friendship existed, and destroying them felt like erasing her. I don't expect you to understand why I kept them. I don't expect you to forgive me for the secrets and the hurt. But I wanted you to know something I couldn't say in court or at the cemetery or during those awkward handoffs. You were the best part of my life for a very long time. The fact that I stopped appreciating that, stopped nurturing that, stopped being present enough to deserve it, that's my failure, not yours. Emma, my sister, asked me before she died if I regretted marrying you. I told her no. I told her you'd given me the happiest years of my life and the greatest gift I'd ever receive, our daughter. I told her my only regret was taking you for granted. She asked if I'd marry you again, knowing how it would end. I said yes without hesitation. I don't know if that means anything to you. I don't know if it changes anything. But I needed to say it, even if only on paper, even if you never read it. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved someone who fought for you. I hope you find that person. And I hope, maybe, we can find our way back to being friends. Not right away, not until you're ready, but someday. With love and regret, David. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring. The words. Then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called David. He answered on the 3rd ring. Sarah, is Emma okay? She's fine. She's at Rachel's for a playdate. I called about something else. Okay, uncertainty in his voice. I found your letters, I said. The ones to your sister and the one to me. Silence, then. I didn't mean for you to find those. I know, but I did, and I paused, trying to find the right words. I wanted to say thank you. For what? For being honest, finally, for not making excuses or trying to rewrite history, for just saying what you felt. More silence. David, I said, I don't know if we'll ever be friends, real friends the way we were before, but I think we could try, for Emma's sake, but also for ours. Because carrying around this grief and anger is exhausting, and I think we've both been tired for long enough. I heard him breathe out, a sound like release. I'd like that, trying, I mean. Okay, I said, so let's try. We started with coffee. Once a month, on a Sunday when Emma was with Rachel's family, David and I would meet at a cafe halfway between our houses and talk. At first, it was stilted, surface-level updates, careful avoidance of anything too personal. But gradually, we remembered how to talk to each other. He told me about work, about a new project designing a community center. I told him about the hospital, about a particularly difficult case with a teenager in the oncology ward. We talked about Emma, always Emma, but also about ourselves. Slowly, incrementally, we stopped being just Emma's parents and became something else. Not friends, not yet, but not strangers either. Something in between, something undefined. One day, 6 months into our coffee meetings, David asked, "Do you ever think about what Emma said? My sister, I mean, about us drifting apart because we stopped trying." "All the time," I admitted. "Do you think it was fixable, if we'd noticed earlier?" I thought about that. Maybe, but I think we both had to break before we could figure out what wasn't working. Sometimes you can't fix something until it's completely fallen apart. He nodded slowly. "That's depressing." "Or hopeful," I said, "depending on how you look at it." "How do you look at it?" I smiled. "Ask me in another year." The final letter. 2 years after the divorce, Emma, my Emma, our Emma, asked me a question that broke and healed me in equal measure. We were making dinner, just like the night she'd first mentioned her father's friend. She was 8 now, taller, reading chapter books, too smart for her own good. "Mommy," she said, stirring pasta sauce, "are you and Daddy going to be friends again?" "We are friends," I said carefully. "We talk, we work together to take care of you." "Real friends," she interrupted. "Like before, like when he'd make you laugh so hard you'd snort." The memory hit me unexpectedly. David had always been able to make me laugh like that, completely uninhibited and ridiculous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that with anyone. "I don't know, baby," I said honestly. "Sometimes people change too much to go back to how things were, but that doesn't mean they can't find something new and good." "Like what?" I struggled for the right analogy. "Like a tree that gets cut down but grows back differently. Still a tree, still alive, but not the same shape." Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Is different bad?" "Not always. Sometimes different is just different." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to stirring. But the question stayed with me. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat down and wrote a letter of my own. Not to David, not exactly, but to myself and to Emma, both Emmas, and to everyone who'd played a part in the collapse and reconstruction of my life. I never sent it, never showed it to anyone, but writing it helped me understand something I'd been circling around for 2 years. The marriage had to end. It was already dead. The divorce just made it official. And while the pain of that ending was real and valid, so was the relief. So was the freedom to start over, to figure out who I was outside of David's wife or even Emma's mother. I was Sarah Chen, and I was enough all by myself. The story could end there, neat and resolved. But life isn't neat, and resolution doesn't mean everything makes sense. 3 years after the divorce, David got remarried. Not to anyone I knew. A woman named Patricia, an urban planner he'd met through work. He told me about her 2 months into their relationship, nervous and apologetic, like he needed my permission. "I'm happy for you," I said, and I meant it. Mostly. There was still a small, petty part of me that twinged with jealousy, but it was manageable, acknowledgeable and dismissible. Emma liked Patricia, which was what mattered. She came home from David's place talking about Patricia's dog and Patricia's garden, and how Patricia taught her to make chocolate chip cookies from scratch. "Is it weird?" Rachel asked me over wine one night. "Your ex moving on." "Yeah," I admitted, "but also no. I want David to be happy. I really do, just not so happy that it makes me feel like I was the problem all along." "You weren't the problem," Rachel said firmly. "You were just 2 people who stopped being the right people for each other." "I know, but knowing and feeling are different things." She raised her glass, to knowing better, even when feeling doesn't catch up. We drank to that. I went on more dates. Some good, some terrible, most forgettable. I was starting to accept that maybe I wouldn't find another grand love story, and that was okay. I had Emma, I had my career, I had friends and hobbies and a life that felt full even when it felt lonely. Then I met James. He was a hospital administrator, recently transferred from Seattle. Divorced, father of a 10-year-old son, kind eyes and an easy laugh. We met in the cafeteria, bonded over terrible coffee and worse hospital bureaucracy, and gradually became friends. It took me 6 months to realize I was developing feelings. Another 3 months to do anything about it. We went on our first official date on a rainy Thursday in November, exactly 4 years after David had walked out with his divorce papers. The symmetry felt meaningful, though I couldn't say why. James knew about my divorce. I told him the broad strokes: married young, grew apart, split amicably enough, but not the details. Not about the secret sister or the letter from a dying woman or the way I'd spent a year convinced I was fundamentally unlovable. On our third date, sitting in his car after dinner, he asked, "What are you afraid of, Sarah?" The question surprised me. "What do you mean?" "I can feel you holding back, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. What are you afraid of?" I almost lied, almost said nothing or deflected with a joke. But James's eyes were patient and genuine, and I was tired of protecting myself from honesty. "I'm afraid of not being enough," I said quietly. "I'm afraid that I'll invest in this in us and you'll realize I'm just adequate, not worth fighting for." "Sarah," he said, and the gentleness in his voice almost undid me. "You're not adequate. You're extraordinary. And if I ever make you feel otherwise, I need you to call me on it immediately, because that would mean I'm not paying attention." I kissed him then, in the rain-spattered car, and it felt like the beginning of something I'd stopped believing I could have. The real ending. 5 years after the divorce, Emma, my daughter, asked to visit her aunt's grave. I was surprised. She'd never expressed interest before, though she knew about David's sister in the vague way children know about family history that doesn't directly impact them. "Why now?" I asked. She shrugged, 11-year-old eloquence. "I want to say thank you. Dad told me about her letter, the one that helped you guys." David had told her. Of course he had. We'd agreed when she was old enough we'd be honest about the divorce. Not in painful detail, but enough truth that she'd understand it wasn't anyone's fault. "Okay," I said, "let's go." We drove to the cemetery on a Saturday afternoon, bright and clear. Emma brought flowers, daisies, cheerful and simple. She stood in front of the grave, reading the inscription. "She was 28, Emma said. "That's really young." "It is." "Dad says she was funny and brave." "I think she was." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you think things happen for a reason?" "What do you mean?" "Like Aunt Emma got sick, and it was sad, but it also helped you and Dad be honest. So do you think maybe the universe needed that to happen?" I knelt down next to my daughter, this wise, thoughtful human I'd somehow helped create. "I don't know, baby. I think sometimes bad things happen and we find meaning in them because the alternative is too painful. But that doesn't mean the bad things needed to happen." "But you're happier now, right? You and Dad both." "Yeah," I said, "we are." "Then maybe it wasn't for nothing." She laid the daisies on the grave, and we stood there together, 3 generations of women, one living, one dead, one almost, connected by pain and healing and the messy, complicated business of letting go. 7 years after the divorce, David and I had a conversation that felt like closure. We were at Emma's middle school graduation, sitting together in the auditorium. Me, David, Patricia, and James, this strange blended family we'd accidentally built. Emma was on stage, giving a speech about perseverance, and I felt a swell of pride so intense it was almost painful. After the ceremony, while Emma was taking photos with friends, David pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "Patricia and I are expecting a baby. She's 12 weeks along." I felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Happiness for him, a twinge of something that might have been loss, curiosity about how Emma would react, concern about the logistics of blended family dynamics. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it. "That's wonderful, David. You're okay with this?" "It's not really my business what I'm okay with," I said. "But for what it's worth, yes, I'm happy for you." He looked relieved. "Emma's going to have a little sibling, Half-sibling, I guess. I wanted you to hear it from me before we told her." "I appreciate that." We stood in comfortable silence, watching our daughter laugh with her friends. "Sarah," David said eventually, "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for how I handled everything, for the secrets and the cowardice and the pain." "I know," I said, "and I forgive you. Really, genuinely forgive you. We were both doing the best we could with what we knew." "Were we, though?" "Close enough," I said, "and we learned. That counts for something." He smiled, and it was the same smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, warm and a little sad and entirely human. "Yeah," he said, "it does." Epilogue, the final truth. 10 years after the divorce, I found myself back at Emma Carson's grave. Not because of any dramatic reason. No crisis, no anniversary, no existential spiral. I was just passing through the area and felt pulled to visit. The grave was well-maintained. Someone, David, probably, had planted flowers nearby, perennials that came back every year. The headstone was weathered now, softened by a decade of seasons. I sat down on the grass next to it, not caring about the damp or the dirt. "Hey," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. "It's been a while." The cemetery was quiet, except for birdsong and distant traffic. "I wanted to tell you that you were right," I continued. "About the marriage ending because we stopped fighting for it. About David and me both deserving better. About all of it, really." A breeze rustled through the trees. "Emma, my Emma, your niece, she's 15 now. Beautiful and smart and so much wiser than I was at her age. She knows about you. She knows what you did for us, writing that letter. She calls you her guardian angel, which I think you'd find either touching or embarrassing." I smiled, imagining Emma Carson's reaction. Based on David's stories, she'd probably roll her eyes and make a joke about being a terrible angel. "I'm married again," I said. "To a man named James. We've been together 5 years, married for 2. He's good to me. Patient and kind and present in ways I didn't know I needed. We're happy, really happy in this quiet, sustainable way that doesn't feel fragile." The confession felt important, like Emma needed to know her sacrifice, her honesty, had led somewhere good. "David's happy too. He and Patricia have twin boys, now 3-year-olds who are apparently terrors in the best way. He sends me photos sometimes. We're friends, I think. Real friends, not close but genuine." I pulled up some weeds growing near the headstone, a small act of caretaking. "I used to be angry at you," I admitted. "For the letter, for the truth, for forcing me to face things I didn't want to face. But I'm not anymore. You gave me permission to let go of something that was already gone. That's a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one." The sun was starting to set, casting golden light through the cemetery trees. "So thank you," I said, "for your honesty, for your courage, for caring about people you'd never met. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. You've certainly helped the rest of us find it." I stood up, brushed off my pants, and took one last look at the grave. "Emma Carson, I was here, I mattered, I loved." "Yeah," I said softly, "you really did." That night back at home, I wrote one final letter. Not to Emma Carson this time, but to myself, the version of me that had stood in that kitchen 10 years ago, shattered and confused and convinced her life was over. "Dear Sarah, right now you think this is the end. You think you've failed, that you're unlovable, that you'll never recover from this betrayal. You're wrong. This is the beginning. The painful, devastating beginning, but the beginning nonetheless. You're going to spend the next year angry, and the year after that sad, and the year after that learning how to be alone without being lonely. You're going to date the wrong people and the almost right people, and eventually, miraculously, the right person. You're going to watch your daughter grow into a remarkable human. You're going to become friends with your ex-husband, which will feel impossible right now, but will eventually feel natural. You're going to build a life that doesn't look anything like what you imagined, but will feel authentic in ways your marriage never did. You're going to forgive David. More importantly, you're going to forgive yourself. And one day, a decade from now, you're going to realize that the divorce, as painful as it was the catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. So hold on, trust the process. Let yourself grieve and rage and heal at your own pace. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be extraordinary. With love and hard-won wisdom, your future self. I sealed the letter in an envelope and tucked it into my journal, a message in a bottle to nowhere and everywhere at once. Then I went downstairs, where James was helping Emma with her algebra homework, and their easy banter filled the house with warmth. My house, my family, my life. Different from what I'd planned, but exactly what I needed. And finally, blessedly enough,